Welcome to The Authority File, the podcast where you'll hear conversations with academic librarians, technologists, researchers, and authors whose work is laying the foundation for higher education's future. I'm Bill Mickey, your host and the editorial director at Choice. If you're new to The Authority File, you can listen to and find previous episodes on all of the major podcast platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, and on our website, choice360.org. In this four-part series, which is provided with support from Sage Publishing, my guests and I take a close look at the undergraduate workflow, basically defined as a student's learning experience. As we do this, we'll pay particular attention to the ways in which the relationships between the library, teaching faculty, and students can be optimized for better learning outcomes. Joining me are Samantha Sharman, who is currently a student at the University of Lincoln, a public research university in Lincoln, England, Jamie Wood, professor of history and education at the University of Lincoln, and Ian Snowley, Dean of Student Learning Development and University Librarian, also at the University of Lincoln, and Matt Hayes, Managing Director of Technology at Sage Publishing. In this first episode, we meet our guests and provide some context on the undergraduate workflow, including a new research project Samantha, Jamie, and Ian are undertaking. Okay, everybody, welcome to the program. It's great to have you all here. I think to begin, maybe we should do a quick round robin of introductions. So if you want to briefly introduce yourselves, that would be great. Where you're currently working and or studying, your title, and how you're involved in this particular research. Samantha, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, so I'm Samantha. I'm a student at the University of Lincoln, studying classical studies at the moment. And basically, I was the student researcher on the project, so I was the one involved with sort of gathering and analysing the data.
Okay, excellent. And Jamie, let's go over to you.
Hi, I'm Jamie Wood. I'm Professor of History and Education in the School of History and Heritage at the University of Lincoln. So I guess I'm one of Samantha's tutors, and I'm involved in this through work I've been doing around how students read online for their studies, and what that. And then also how we teach them to read online, so that the sort of pedagogic angle is where I'm coming from.
Excellent. And then Ian.
Hello, I'm Ian Snowley. I'm Dean of Student Learning Development and University Librarian at the University of Lincoln. And really my role has been to support Jamie and Sam in doing the research, but also as an ultimate consumer of it. I think we shall definitely be using the outputs in our discussions with the university and academics generally.
Excellent, right. And then last but not least, how about you, Matt?
Hi, everyone. I'm Matt Hayes. I am Managing Director of Technology from Sage, which means I'm responsible for the Tallis, Lean Library, and SciWheel products, all of which focus to some degree on the undergraduate workflow. And I also have a personal interest in this, completing a part-time PhD at the moment with UCL in education.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you, everybody. So, Matt, you mentioned the term undergraduate workflow, and that's a lot of what this research project is focusing on. Sticking with you for a minute, can you help us understand what we mean by undergraduate workflow and what might fall under that terminology?
Yes, absolutely. So I suppose there are multiple workflows depending on what your discipline is, the university that you study in, your personal preferences. But we think that there's a common core, which is that most undergraduates will be set particular tasks by their professors and by faculty. They will also be set reading to review. They will have to write essays and perform individual writing tasks. They will have to collaborate with fellow students. And without going into all of them, many other tasks like that. And a lot of those take place online as well as face-to-face. And with our hat on as the provider of digital tools, we're mainly focused on the online workflow. So looking at ways that we can support those undergraduates when, for example, they're trying to access content online that they've been asked to read by faculty, or maybe when they are trying to work out how to correctly reference a particular academic article and pull together their references for an essay, or how just very intuitively to be able to access all of the reading that's been recommended to them by faculty. So those are the, I suppose those are the core parts of the workflow that we're focused on, and we think that they are shared by most undergraduates across their different disciplines.
Okay, excellent. Samantha, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this as well. I mean, is your understanding of what the undergraduate workflow, does that jibe with what Matt has just described?
Essentially, yeah. Matt's got a
Yeah.
very technical way of putting it, but from my perspective as a student, the undergraduate workflow is the work we're given and how we go about doing it and how we get from A to B in our studies. So just the methods students apply in their day-to-day studies and what they get up to in order to achieve the tasks set by them.
Right.
Staff.
Yeah. And from your perspective, I guess, is there sort of a uniformity in the way students kind of work through that workflow, or
Absolutely
it varies?
not.
Yeah,
No,
okay.
it widely varies from student to student and from course to course.
Okay, great. And then Jamie, over to you. Does that? I'm wondering what your perspective on what's been described so far is.
Yeah, I mean, I think I sit somewhere in between. So I get, I think it is. I think the idea of like how you get from A to B, it's how you get from what the tutor might be setting or what the student's aiming to do to what they kind of finally produce is the workflow. And then I think Matt outlined really well the different elements that might sit within that process. And I think what we, and I completely reiterate what Samantha said about it varies widely by discipline according to individual preference. There are all sorts of other things that act on that, like whether students have learning difficulties or time pressure, also the level of their study that we hope, and I think in general students do develop their ability to navigate that workflow through the course of their studies. But there are definitely certain things that they find harder than others. There are certain kind of pinch points or pressure points that are quite common as well. And I think that's one of the things that this project is enabling us to think about, how in terms of reading lists and giving students access to materials more broadly, how can we help them to do that element of the workflow more effectively?
Right. And then Ian, I imagine you segue pretty well from what Jamie just said, and you see a lot of, in terms of helping students navigate these pain points and other issues around the workflow. That's a lot of what your library deals with, I imagine.
Absolutely. And I think the key point is about librarians occupying the right spaces in that workflow. And obviously not talking about physical spaces as such, but being available to students and our resources being available to students when they need them. And that really is one of our biggest challenges. And the point that Sam made about how varied students' individual responses are, both from individual people and from subject to subject, it makes that quite a challenge because you can't really plan for it. You can't have a system that works for everyone. So our real challenge is to find ways to present ourselves and the services and the support we can provide when students realize it's important to them, because we learn very quickly that you can tell people about these things early on, but they really only matter when somebody hits one of those problems or those blockages that you mentioned.
Right. Okay. So we've talked a little bit already about this research project, but I'd like us to kind of provide some background on that. So you're all working on a student-led research project that examines some of the characteristics that we've just explained. So can you provide some background to the research project and the outcomes you're hoping it will provide? And Matt, why don't we start with you on that?
Yes, of course. So I think I'm probably best speaking to the objectives of the research project from Thalys's perspective, one of those technology from Sage products. And from our perspective, we really wanted to understand better what the undergraduate perception was of reading list solutions. So the area where they are prescribed reading by faculty and how they engage with that, and try to understand their relative usage of it, whether it's clear and easy to access and engage with, if there are other ways they would prefer to access their reading, and then also to try and triangulate that with faculty perception as well, and see if there was a knowledge gap between faculty and undergraduates in terms of, for example, things like whether faculty felt that undergraduates engage with a good range of the reading that they are assigned, or if they predominantly focus on just the core reading. And if they do focus on the core reading, to what extent they engage with it critically, and whether there are things that faculty would like to see undergraduates do more of, and also the other side of the coin as well, whether undergraduates would like faculty to provide more guidance, more signposting, and make things a bit more easy for them to navigate. So that was really our objective in going into it, to understand those two stakeholders and how they interact with each other, because we felt we could learn a lot from how to improve our product, which is all focused on the reading list solution as an online tool.
Okay, excellent. And then Samantha, can you provide a little bit more detail on your role in the project, and also perhaps what you're hoping to learn from the results as well?
Yeah, so my role is just essentially to gather the data and the feedback from students about their opinions on the reading lists and such, to help Talus understand what they actually want from a reading list, and to just understand as well how they sort of interact with them in their studies and what they view as good or bad. And my main aim with that is to help shape professional practice, because I think as a student, our desires and just general needs in our studies are often, I don't want to say pushed to the side, but not necessarily addressed in the right way. So it's quite a great experience for me to be able to help actively take problems and help solve them from a student perspective, especially in this area where reading lists, we use them on a daily basis. So it's quite important in our studies.
Right. So just to follow on that, are you hoping to, I guess, apply the results of the project to help the sort of professionals involved in this process do their jobs better, or are you also looking for outcomes that can kind of help students make some changes to the way they do their own work?
Twofold.
Both?
Well, both really, because there's a lot of I think in the research we found there was a bit of a disjoint between how students were using their online resources so they could receive better guidance and such, but also staff listening to student opinion on such as like how to signpost resources and how the accessibility is really important, like a twofold relationship between the two. So it'd be great if we could get some improvement in all areas, really.
Great, excellent. And then Jamie, anything you want to add so far?
No, I think just a bit of the background to Samantha and my engagement in the project is some research that we've been doing and just finished around the thing about how students read online and how we teach them to do so. I think that revealed to us a lot of disconnections as well. And one of the things that kind of persistently came up, even though we were asking more about the kind of mechanics of reading, really, what people actually do for the physical act of reading online and things like that, was around access and how they find things in the first place. So I think all of these things are part of a wider kind of ecosystem or something of different elements of getting students to work through that workflow. And that's really what kind of piqued my interest in the project in the first place.
Okay, so this was some research you were doing separate from this particular project?
Yeah.
Okay, great. And then Ian, this is sounding an awful lot like a lot of it centered on discovery and that kind of thing, and that's something I know libraries kind of continually work on. Is that kind of where you're focused on this project?
Yes, but I think the other thing that's really key is the point that it's student-led work, and I think it reflects accurately the student voice. And that's very important to us at Lincoln, but it should be very important everywhere. And particularly from the point of view of librarians, we have a pretty good idea of what students want and the experiences they have because they tell us about them. And we try and set our systems up and our policies with that in mind. But having evidence through research like this is really valuable. But it also gives us a really strong argument for our discussions with faculty, because it is sometimes the case that that those messages haven't got through to academic staff. And they kind of say, well, why do we have to do this? Why do we have to use a system like Talis? But if you can point to those reasons, and that's certainly where I shall want to use this research, really just to emphasize the things that we ask of academics, but also to refine those as well, to make sure that they reflect what the research is telling us, and really just get that message out that students have a lot of pressures, they have a lot of problems, they have a lot of challenges, and structuring things and organizing them into a logical way is always going to lead to more engagement rather than not doing that, which will lead to less engagement. So we've got other problems with resources, but if we can sort these things out and make sure that things like reading lists are used in a structured and organized way, then we definitely lift the student experience.
Right. And then, Jamie, do you think, in sort of general terms, that teaching faculty would be receptive to these ideas?
I think so. I mean, I think probably.
Yeah.
I think there can be a reluctance to do new things, particularly if they're seen as being a kind of top-down imposition. But I think using the student sort of feedback, demonstrating that it's based in sort of actual research, I think is often persuasive for academics rather than kind of managerial whim, which is less so, or if it feels like that, it can be less persuasive. I think another important point is if Ian can point to changes having been made to the product that address some of the problems that academics also experience with it, you can say, actually, this is an improved product. It's in response to feedback that we've been given. It's building on student experience and student sort of practice. That's potentially quite persuasive. I think also, emphasizing that, like Ian said, it will, in a way, it will actually make your lives easier because the students will be finding things more easily. They won't be asking you to find things for them. They'll be hopefully producing better work. So these are all things that actually down the line will help the academic workflow as much as the student workflow, I think.
Nice. Okay. I'm curious, now that we've kind of talked about this, like why does this continue to be important to examine these issues? I mean, why does the juncture of student, librarian, and teaching faculty continue to be such a moving target in terms of like priority alignments in this area? Ian, we'll go back to you on this to start.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It really is quite interesting that reading lists, for example, are still quite a contentious area, particularly for academics and librarians. And I think it's very good that systems like Talis Aspire have removed some of the contention, because historically there's always been a huge issue that librarians often didn't know what students were being asked to read because nobody told them about it. And the kind of systems get around that, but they still don't address necessarily some of the other things, which is about what students' idea of a reasonable amount of reading is versus an academic's idea of reasonable reading. And they don't necessarily also address some of the structural issues in terms of supply of resources, but they at least kind of smooth out some of the problems in terms of the workflow as we're addressing it. And I think for that reason, they help us, and they help us to move on and have other discussions. And clearly this research is a good way to do that. And just picking up on what Jamie said about seeing the product change, I think one of the other powerful bits of this research is the fact that Talis are part of it, that they're kind of here supporting it and engaging with it. And I think that hopefully encourages librarians and academics to recognize that the product will develop and will take account of real life use, because sometimes, sadly, products we have to work with don't seem to be based in the real world.
Matt, anything you want to add in support to that?
Well, it's just so kind of Ian to say that. And it's absolutely right that is our intention and aspiration to take into account all of this. Because, I mean, some good examples would be, if you think about all the changes that are taking place just at a macro level in society, that then faculty and librarians and the university are trying to implement. For example, a greater focus on DEI, or a greater focus on openness in research and scholarship. All of those things trickle down into something that may sound so sort of everyday as a reading list, because it's unfair to expect faculty, with all they've got on their plate, to also go through extra layers of discrimination and tagging around content, around, for example, things like decolonization. So a tool like ours, if it is fit for purpose, should be trying to provide as much support as possible to make their lives easier. So I suppose that's how it also connects back to your question about alignment between these different stakeholders, and why it needs to be constantly assessed, because the sector overall is just moving so fast. The whole focus on student-centered learning as well is also why you have to make sure you're always putting the student at the center of a product like ours that's trying to help out. And I'm sure there'll be other big changes coming as well. So that would be our perspective on it, that we can't afford not to pay attention because things are moving so fast.
Right. Then, Sam, I wanted to circle back with you now that you've heard everybody kind of talk about that. I mean, is this all kind of, again, sort of aligning with what you're hoping to see as a result of this?
Definitely. I mean, student needs are constantly evolving. You look at the pandemic and you see a massive shift in what students desire from their resources and how they learn. So it's great to hear that there's acknowledgement of that.
Yeah.
And just the development of, the sector overall and how it's rapidly changing, and it's being acknowledged and it's being incorporated into plans. It's great to hear.
Good. You just heard from Samantha Sharman, who is currently a student at the University of Lincoln, a public research university in Lincoln, England; Jamie Wood, professor of history and education at the University of Lincoln; Ian Snowley, Dean of Student Learning and Development and University Librarian at the University of Lincoln; and Matt Hayes, Managing Director of Technology at Sage Publishing. This series is brought to you with support from Sage Publishing. Join us next week as we examine the student's perspective of the undergraduate workflow and look at how teaching and learning expectations in many ways no longer align with library and faculty assumptions.
We've had a reading list system for a good long while now, probably 10 years plus. But I do still remember early discussions where academics would say, well, isn't this spoon feeding if you're actually telling students what they have to read? But the alternative, which is asking them to guess what they're meant to read and find it for themselves, is really just not sort of tenable. So yes, I think there are still kind of perhaps differentials in terms of how people see things. But I think what is kind of really useful with a system that's responsive is you can let people use it to an appropriate way for their discipline, for their approach, for the particular point in their program, and still have that consistency that a system provides.
As always, underwriting opportunities for the Authority File podcast are directed by Choice's advertising manager, Pam Marino, and all of our episodes are produced and edited by Choice's digital media producer, Sabrina Kofer, with support from digital media assistant, Ashley Roy. That's all for this week. Thanks for joining us.